Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Own Devices. And as I keep on promising you, we have another guest with a lot of fascinating insight and on a topic that we really don't talk about a lot these days. But it is something all of us have been really hassled by. If you've been on social media, you have been trolled. And we have with us John May, who's from the University of Southern California, and he's a research associate professor of computer science. But the kind of work he's doing is really fascinating. We'll talk about that in detail. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nando. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
John, on our own devices, we take up a lot of topics. We do a deep dive into that topic. So this time, you're going to tell us about the toxicity in social media or in the internet as a whole. But before we get into that, can you talk a little bit about your work and what does this lab that you work in? How do you structure your work?
Sure. So I'm a research professor at USC and at the Information Sciences Institute, and I've been working in the area of natural language processing for something like 20 years, give or take, and I cover a lot of different areas like machine translation and information extraction and things like that. And lately, I've been looking more and more at I've been more interested in creative dialogue and how to talk with computers and how we can make it more comfortable to talk with computer programs and how that can facilitate actually human to human communication. And so we've looked into, for example, trying to make chatbots more creative by teaching them principles of improvisational theater to have them help stimulate ideas so that you could maybe brainstorm something with a virtual partner in case whoever you would normally be brainstorming with is asleep and you want to do some brainstorming late at night. So we were also, one thing that was really kind of apparent to me, especially during a lockdown of the pandemic and spending more and more time at home and more time in like a social media chat forum that would be like, say, dedicated to my town or dedicated to some particular interest of mine, is that it's just very easy. I'm sure everybody here, or everybody watching knows about this, that just conversations can just like really go off the rails. Somebody says something, types something, and it's taken the wrong way, or a little bit of sarcasm turns into just a whole mess of trouble. Or there's some maybe bad actor that comes on and decides to, they maybe they had a bad day, or maybe that's just the way that they behave, and they just kind of let loose, making fun of you at every turn, not letting you get a word in edgewise. And any information that you've been trying to exchange with people in a good faith way just breaks down, right? And we really wanted to try to see if there's some way that we could do something about that, because in forums that are fairly closely moderated, there's some great people out there that put in a lot of really unpaid time to try to make sure that everybody's having a good time. And it's not just a matter of like banning the people that aren't behaving or use the wrong word or something like that. It's really about engaging with people who go off the rails. And this helps if, like, for example, my town has 30,000 people in it. It's inside Los Angeles, but it's about 30,000 people, and most of them are on this one chat forum, it seems. And we know each other, honestly. Like, a lot of us know each other. So even when we get in fights, right? Like, you can say, hey, I know you didn't mean that, right? Like, think about what this person's trying to express, and that can actually calm down the conversations. But that's not scalable. So that's why we wanted to see, could we build chatbots that can try to get you to think about what you're saying and realize that you maybe made maybe what you said could have been misinterpreted, and just kind of have a little bit of self-realization.
The scale that you talk about, and it's gone off the rails, right? Because you had products that were made maybe to have a conversation between two people, or maybe to have an offline conversation in office, but now it's used by millions of people. According to last estimates, I think WhatsApp, for instance, in India is about 500 million users. Twitter
Yep.
is about 200 million users. Facebook is almost 3 billion users, by some accounts. So how do you do this at scale? Then it becomes a completely different problem, right? So how do
Right.
you do this at scale? And also, in the early times of the internet, what we used to call sentiment analysis and all of that, that's also changed so much because, as you said, the bad actors are maybe having too many conversations, right? So how do you, I guess the toxicity is also scaled up. So how do you
Yeah.
reconcile with both of this?
Well, I think, you know, I don't know. I can't say, and I'm not sure if there is anybody who can say about whether, how many actual bad actors there are. But I guess I try to have a rosy view of the world and think that, there are a few loud people that are trying to make mischief. And maybe, but they're maybe temporarily making mischief, and maybe they'll grow out of it. And there's some people that maybe we just don't want to have part of the conversation. But I think a lot of times it's really just you had a bad day, and just the way you came off with a person who you've really dehumanized, because there's no person on the other end, right? That dehumanization kind of takes control, and so you don't think that I mean, I don't know about you, but I would really have a hard time just like yelling at somebody in the store, right? If they said something that I didn't like, I would maybe tend to kind of like walk away, perhaps if I heard somebody saying something that I didn't really agree with, because I don't want to get into conflict. That's just me. I'm conflict averse, but I'm less conflict averse online, right? And we should probably be a little bit more conflict averse. So anyway, so that's part of. I think there's just more of us online, and that's why it seems like there's more and more of this kind of toxicity. But anyway, as to your question about how does it scale? Well, I mean, companies are trying to scale this up, to their credit. You can like on Reddit, for example, there are very simple scripting bots that you can use that are going to look for words that shouldn't be used, and will on one hand they can just delete somebody's conversations if you're an administrator, or probably more smartly, they can send a little message to the administrators to say, "Hey, maybe take a look at this," and then a human can take over and try to do it. So that helps a little. It honestly does, rather than just having to see everything that comes through. But you know, in the extreme case, you can actually have, of course, a bot just respond to something that's said, and try and engage. But this has been very this doesn't work very well, right? You can tell when there's a bot there, and more importantly, there's still not much humanity there in a default kind of conversation where it's like, "Hi, it looks like you use the word, insert wrong word here, please stop using that word." A word is really not the issue. You can use a word, and a totally normal word, and it can be a really cutting insult that really is inappropriate, and you can use a word that we would maybe agree is a swear, and in context it's totally fine. The real trick comes down to trying to understand intent, and this is very hard. We're working on it right now by looking at the context of the conversation. So if you look at what has been said beforehand, can you predict whether or not a particular thing that you're saying right now is more likely to be, let's say, moderatable, or to be toxic in some way? You can also try some areas that we're working on now is to try to understand, like, how are you addressing an issue? Are you like maybe coming at the counterpoint of the side just to be a jerk about something, and really just trying to make somebody mad? And I'll tell you, these are not solved problems right now. This is something that we're actively working on right now. What we've been able to figure out is that we can actually get a chatbot to create messages that are not just very uniform and cookie cutter, and just please stop saying those words. Rather, we get them to engage and try to to really reflect what somebody is saying, and try to kind of say it back to them in a way that is a little bit interpretive. Like, I heard you say that you wish this person would die in a fire, right? Are you saying this because that you're frustrated that they don't understand your point of view? And it's that kind of like trying to maybe do a little bit of like neo-Rogerian psychoanalysis, where I'm trying to reflect what you said back at you, just so you can hear what you wrote. And what we've seen is that if you do that versus if you try to just say like, hey, please stop using those words, please stop criticizing this person. Everybody has a right to say, but if you actually try to get them to try to understand where somebody's coming from, even when they're being a jerk, even though it's a bot, and it's a bot, and like if you say the same thing again, they'll say the same thing again. Um, we found that people seem to appreciate this more, and they're more likely to change their behavior. And so we're cautiously optimistic that this actually can work out.
It is interesting that you talk about context, but since a lot of the conversations we are having online is maybe spread over multiple continents, the context also changes, right? The sense and the
Yes.
sensibility of the conversation changes. A word that is maybe good in one part of the world, has maybe a completely different, connotation somewhere else. So, how do you working on NLP? How do you figure that out? Do you have geofencing of what logic to be used where? It gets even more complex, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, this is a really tricky thing, right? The an expression that can seem completely innocuous in the U.S. can be taken to mean something completely different in India, and I would say that at this point we don't have a good answer for this. It's something that we're still working on. I mean, working across cultures is a big passion of mine, and trying to understand how different cultures can communicate is really important. That's why I've done a lot of work in machine translation. Uh, I think what is I'd like to solve the problem locally at first, which is to say that have uh, rather than trying to have like an American say, go over to an Indian forum and totally speak out of turn, right? We should at least be able to work within our own spaces and understand that. And so to that end, when I said we're using context to try to predict whether or not we can or when we can weigh in, when we can moderate, what we do is we actually look at the history of what's been said in a particular sub forum. We've been spending a lot of time looking at like Reddit sub forums because there's very many of them, and there's lots of different topics, and some are totally innocuous, and you've probably heard about some that are really really vile, and there's different standards that exist within them. The Like I said, the Reddit chat forums, there's a large variety of them. Some are totally innocuous, some are toxic, and many of them have been moderated before by humans. And so we have a record of when moderation has happened, and we can see the context in which it's happened. And this is a bottom up kind of moderation. So I'm not putting my particular views on when we should moderate or not. We're just trying to build a model that looks at the data. Now, of course, if people are moderating in an inappropriate way, then that would be reflected in the model. But the point is that we can create models that are local to the subdomain, and this can help us at least have culturally relevant moderation and culturally relevant weighing in about when something is wrong. That is not going to be a one size fits all solution. So that's something. The cross moderation though that you talk about, this is quite important, and I guess being able to inform somebody that, hey, you got to understand the world that you're getting in here. These things are all right. These things are not all right. I think we could all learn to do that well. I would say one more thing is that we're working on this now. I don't think we're ready for a fully automated solution, but what we can do here is provide tools that can help the human moderators by saying, hey, here's what we think you should say, and they get the last pass, right? We still want to trust human judgment ultimately.
It is interesting that you spoke about full automation because often I know about commenting engines, for instance, which has a very high sensitivity for whatever it thinks is toxic, right? For
Mm-hmm.
instance, I have used a commenting backend where if you say assassinate, and it could be in the context of news, it's being blocked because it has two asses in it.
Yep.
Right?
Wow.
So it's a very extreme view, but then what happens is that everything that it thinks is toxic goes behind a block or has to be moderated for it to be published.
Yeah.
And given the state of some of the social media platforms, do you think that extreme view might also at times be needed, or is it always better to bring in a little bit of human intervention?
The standards are totally different, right? Like, you could be in a venue that's warm and loving, and still there's lots of f bombs and s bombs and all that, and then you could have a right, and so you don't want to just let any kind of off the shelf commenting auto moderation go out. Absolutely not. Th- this is a very subtle kind of thing, in fact, right? Sarcasm, we're getting better, but we're still not nearly there yet, right? And the context is not simply just all the previous things that have been said. Context is the world, right? It's the social sphere in which you're in, the day of the week, the general topic of the conversation, and the topic of the forum, and uh, you know we are really great at understanding this, and this is the world that we've built, or at least we're better than any machines, right? We still get things wrong from time to time. We still take things out of context, and that's again what leads to the toxicity online because of these accidents. But I think we're also pretty good at self repair. So yeah, no, I think I like building natural language processing systems and trying to make humans more efficient. But at the end of the day, you know, human language is for humans, right? Like we do best when we can communicate with each other.
As you spoke about human language, is it getting even more complex because there is a lot of new ways of saying things, right? Like, people just use emojis, for instance, or people just use, like, short abbreviated words, and which, like, I'm always trying to figure out what does this mean. Are you also always trying to sort of figure out what how language itself is evolving?
I mean, language is always evolving, and I don't think it's going any faster or slower than it ever was. Honestly, you can look at the way if you look at Google Ngrams, for example, right? You can look at the way words are used, and the changes can be very severe over time, and over the same amounts of time. I think maybe we're more exposed to micro changes happening at various parts of the world all over than we were before. When I mean, I wouldn't have known how language is evolving. I wouldn't even know how language is evolving in Arizona, let alone in India, right? Because or I should say, I wouldn't even know how language is evolving in Indiana, let alone in India, because I'm not, getting on a train and going over there. I could only know how things are going off in my little town, and now at least we can see these patterns, neologisms, kind of move around maybe more quickly. And I would say that I think I'm able to like appreciate more international turns of phrase that would have been totally foreign to me. I mean, I remember when I was first even at USC, which has a large Indian student population, and somebody said something about doing the needful, and this is an expression that I don't know at all, right? And then somebody else mentioned, I think I saw in a resume, somebody said that they were a topper in their class, and these are these are expressions that they totally make sense in context, right? But I had no idea what they meant at the time, right? And so I think being able to communicate more easily, being able to move around the globe helps, and being able to communicate to communicate digitally helps us at least see what's going on. But I think language still evolves. There's always a fresh crop of like basically pre-teens or teens who are trying to distinguish themselves from their parents, and are basically inventing their own language to try to maybe speak a little bit in code, or maybe just express themselves in a way that they feel like their current language can't express. And that beauty keeps language fresh all the time.
Is there a reason why USC and its Information Science Institute chose to work on this field, on fixing toxicity online?
Well, we've been ISI historically has been really at the forefront of interactions online. We were a very early part of the early internet, and we were also way out in front in terms of the development of natural language processing. Some of the very early machine translation was happening out here, and in particular when going into the statistical world in the late 80s. That was happening out here. And in fact, we've also been, USC in general has been at the forefront at of dialogue models. There's another institute called the Institute for Creative Technologies, which was spun off from ISI, and they were leaders in dialogue, and they built a lot of dialogue agents. They have, for example, one that has created virtual humans that have been imbued with the testimonials and recordings and likenesses of Holocaust survivors, and you can just ask them questions, and they're really good at interpreting what you say and responding, even though they're largely pulling in recorded elements. So it's kind of in our, it's in the air, right? It's in our DNA to be working on this. I got into this area because I was interested in languages. That's actually why I came to ISI. I knew they were in the early 2000s working in in translation in a way that not many people were, and I wanted to get involved with multilingual processing, and I wanted to get involved, and that that led to translation. And translation is a lot, in a way, it's a lot like dialogue. I like to think of it. I mean, mechanically, we're building models that take in some language and then put out some language. It's just that for translation, it's a sentence in one language and then that same sentence in another. For dialogue, it's the sentences that have come before, and now what should the next sentence be? But to the perspective of like say a deep learning neural network kind of architecture, it looks the same, right? So it's a very nice shift for me. But we want to, we're still, this is all about fostering communication, right, and helping people communicate better. And so I think that is also in our DNA.
Academic institution, how do you work with the industry, a lot of the social media platforms, and other places where this could be put into use? How do you seed this understanding, this knowledge, to people who can actually make a change on the ground?
We often collaborate with a number of tech companies on various levels of programs. Several years ago, I was the faculty advisor, for example, of a team that worked with Amazon for the Alexa challenge, and that was designing a chatbot that was going to interact with people. That was such an eye-opening experience because you really got to look at the chat logs, right? I mean, that was the nature of the research, and you could see how people were using this as a way to help themselves, feel better when they were bored, or to figure out what movies they wanted to see, all kinds of interesting things like that. So that's one way. There's these natural outreaches. We have, of course, there's a lot of interactions with the students going into internships, and of course, we graduate students that go on to work at companies. We also just collaborate with the researchers. Many of my colleagues are from Google, from Facebook, from Microsoft, and other institutes, and so that kind of collaboration happens at the research production level. And most of what we develop in our lab is free software, and so we make it available, and we're just trying to make further the goal of being able to do better at communicating with dialogue, and so that there's often back and forth there. So I would say where the company barriers come in is pretty much like when they want to work on their own data, and I understand that, of course, right? And so we're helping to build the tools, but they're also helping to build the tools. So it really kind of goes back and forth. And on the whole, it works pretty well, I think.
John, thanks a lot for this very insightful, conversation. And toxicity online is something that, at least in India, we are struggling a lot with. And I'm sure this is going to really, give a lot of context to a lot of people, who are, facing the abuse or looking at finding a solution to the abuse. Thanks a lot for being on the show, John.
Thanks. It was great to meet you.
So you were listening to John May from the University of Southern California, and we'll be back again next time with another guest. You are listening to Our Own Devices. We are everywhere you listen to your pods.